Well, welcome to Voices of the Valley, where we get to meet with writers, broadcasters, et cetera, that cover all kinds of things. We have a propensity toward the Missouri Valley and the Ohio Valley Conference, but today I wanted to bring in an old friend that used to be in the St. Louis area here, and he knows sports all over the planet. We can run the gamut and talk about every sport today with Bob Hille of the Sporting News. And Bob, first, thanks for joining us. It has been like eons since I've actually seen you. You're in North Carolina, I'm assuming. Is that correct?
Actually, I'm in South Carolina.
Wait, where am I? What's my shirt? Hilton at Ocean Course.
We are in Rock Hill, South Carolina, which is right across the border from Charlotte. So basically, it's kind of like Edwardsville, And speaking of which, right off the bat, speaking of Edwardsville, I just want to shout out. Our thoughts and prayers are with the folks there, with the folks in Western Kentucky and everything else. We always take that route through Western Kentucky and Paducah to get up to St. Louis when we're visiting. So this kind of struck pretty close to home for us.
Yeah, absolutely. In the OVC country, it's hit hard, and it's one of the leagues we write a lot about. Long time with the Sporting News, Bob Hille, and a lot of history. And way back when I was doing a lot of local radio here in St. Louis, I was helping manage Sporting News Radio. Now that, here in St. Louis, 1380 The Team, for all of you that remember, probably
right.
3 or 4 people that remember that. But how long for you at the Sporting News, all told, and then maybe in this reincarnation?
Well, I started there in '91. John Rawlings brought me up from Fort Worth, Texas, to be an assistant managing editor, and I was in that role for a few years, and then became a managing editor, and then executive editor, and it ended up being across about 21 years. Got caught in a downsizing here in Charlotte, but then went back to work for a company that, amazingly enough, provided content for the Sporting News. So off and on, it's been about 3 decades. I'm now a senior content consultant for the Sporting News. I'm doing project management for them, a little bit of staff development, stuff like editorial calendars. I'm doing a little bit of writing too, which has been kind of fun because what I've been doing is going back and looking at how the Sporting News covered some of the major events in our time. And I've done Pearl Harbor. I did a piece about Chuck Hughes, who was the Detroit Lions player, the only player to die during the course of an NFL game. Kobe Bryant's first game with the Lakers. So again, it's kind of that idea of the history, but also trying to pull it through into the current times, which is kind of hand in glove with what the Sporting News is doing now. They're rebranding, and it will be the Sporting News. For a long time. The "the" had been dropped, so the "the" is coming back, and it's basically the branding will be the Sporting News, established 1886, which just thrills me.
Oh, I can't listen. I can't wait. When I was a kid, you and I are similar ages. When I was a kid, the Sporting News, the baseball Bible, it was what you had to get and had to read. And then as I got older and then started subscribing to the magazine, you talked about joining in '91. That's when the magazine went full color. And yowzer, was it the best magazine that came out every stinking week? It was must read if you actually cared about sports.
We always had the saying around our newsroom that we weren't the Navy, we were the Pirates, because you had Sports Illustrated at that point, and then ESPN comes on the scene, and there's always that idea of we wanted to help folks see a different game. John hung a big banner across the newsroom that said, "Tell me something I don't know." And that was really kind of our day in, day out marching order. But I will tell you this, going back to what you were saying about, reading as a kid and stuff like that. My connection to the Sporting News goes back into the Depression era. Wow. And my great uncle, at that time during the Great Depression, you could buy a lifetime subscription to the Sporting News for a set amount of money, and you were good for your life.
Wow.
And so when I went to work at the Sporting News in '91, there were some guys who had been working there for decades, and they said, C.C. Johnson Spank, who took over from J.G. Taylor Spank, when one of those lifetime subscribers died, Mr. Spank would come dancing through the newsroom because he could mark another one off the bottom line that he'd been given magazines to for all those years. And I thought that was really funny. And then I got to thinking, well, come to think of it, he was kind of celebrating my great uncle's death. I got to think hard about that.
You mentioned John Rawlings, and he was, the big boss there at the Sporting News for a long time. And of course, I never liked John that much because he had that great head of hair. I was always mad at John for a great head of hair.
Yeah, he was very proud of that. It still is, as a matter of fact, proud of that head of hair, and that's the one thing he has on me. And I just always told him, a busy head won't grow much grass, so we just leave it at that.
When we were doing the radio station here in St. Louis, it was about the same time that Sporting News had been sold, and then they bought One-on-One Sports and started a national radio network. And so we got in on the ground floor of that, and all of the big, like, nationwide known writers and all that, they were on my little local radio show in St. Louis, because the Sporting News was, trying to get their name out there on the radio side, but also we were right here, and Sporting News was a St. Louis thing for so long. That was so exciting for me. I'm meeting, people that are in the national news now, the Mike DeCourcy and Ken Rosenthal's, and those guys, they were just on my little radio show back in the early 2000s.
What's really cool about that is you go back to guys who wrote for the Sporting News, who moved on to other things. And Chris Mortensen is one, but Chris still identifies himself as formerly of the Sporting News. I think it's a brand that people connect to just kind of out of a nostalgia a little bit, but also because it was a smaller group and really close knit. I can tell you that Mike DeCourcy is just as nice a person as you will ever meet. And I would say the same thing about Ken Rosenthal, that we were all kind of in it together, pulling together. And that's a great credit to John. John Rawlings really kind of had us watching after each other, but also striving for big things. And so we would have Bob Costas in the magazine, and we would have Dave Kindred in the magazine. We would have, just really famous people contributing that we thought put a good product together.
Dave Kindred's back page, final one-page article was like must read. You got to go read that to see what he's going to tell me about and instruct me about.
Dave is an interesting guy. He's covering the Lady Potters now in Morton, Illinois. There was a piece on 60 Minutes about him and how that girls' high school basketball team kind of saved him, because his wife Cheryl, who has since passed, had had a stroke and was in a nursing home. He had lost a grandson to drug addiction, which he has a book out now about that, which is just a fabulous book. I can't tell you how good it is. But Dave was always just kind of a very even-keeled guy, but his, covered Muhammad Ali, covered the Olympics in Atlanta, worked in Louisville for many years, was where he got to know Ali. So just getting to work with guys like that was like a graduate level school in journalism, of hearing how those guys went about attacking stories and interviews and stuff like that. So it was always fun.
You and I, before we started recording this, we talked about Stan McNeil, who did tons of baseball writing, still working for Cardinal Magazine. But just the list goes on and on. Sorry, my adoring public. And the list goes on and on. Kyle Veltrop was a guy that was a young guy kept breaking in back in those days. And I still see his son a lot, and so right. You're right. It had a whole family feel, even though it was this national magazine that people all across the country had to read.
Well, I think that's the difference of being in St. Louis and being in New York, maybe. We lost a little bit of that when we moved down here to Charlotte, but Charlotte is certainly different from New York. And, the exciting thing is there are projects going on right now. I got to tell you a quick story about one project that I just wrapped up. There was a guy who's, believe it or not, his name is Fred Rogers. And Fred Rogers had a Sporting News collection. Now, I understand Steve Gitcher, who ran our archives department in St. Louis, was constantly getting calls from people saying, "Hey, I've got this collection of Sporting News. Would you be interested?" And it was always like, "No, we have offers like that all the time." Well, this collection stretched back into the teens of the 20th century, and had some very valuable issues. And then the rest of it stretched into like the 2000s. So again, it's a broad ranging collection that also included like 400 issues that were autographed on the front by maybe who was the subject of that particular issue. So really valuable stuff. Now, the new owner is a guy named Tom Hall. He's a billionaire. He spends his time, about half his time in Hong Kong and the other half his time in UK. He's a world-class poker player, but is really leaning into the history of the brand, which is just,
Beautiful.
again, like I said, it's thrilling.
Yeah.
He's building a podcast studio in Las Vegas where they were going to we're going to buy this collection from Fred Rogers. And Tom said, well, we could probably put it in the podcast studio in Las Vegas. And I'm thinking, how are you going to hold something that big in a podcast studio? Well, then I saw the renderings of the podcast studio, and it's like, it's got a master suite, it's got a TV viewing room, it's got a lap pool, it's got, but the wallpaper, like the wallpaper at the old Sporting News building on 1212 North Lindbergh, is replica copies of old Sporting Newses. So again, this guy really digs it. He has been on the internet buying up Sporting News memorabilia.
Wow.
We're talking with Steve Gitcher and saying, so I see Willie McCovey's MVP award is for sale. Do you think that's legit? And Steve would go, well, if it was like somebody a little more noteworthy than Willie McCovey, I probably would say you got to think about it. But Willie McCovey's a little bit out there for some people. So Steve's doing that kind of stuff for Tom, and again, it's a lot of exciting things coming. Rebranding of the website, which we touched on a little bit, but we are live in Australia now with the rebrand, and that's what Tom's goal is. This is going to be an international sports media company, and that means things will probably be very similar here in the U.S. Stick and ball sports, some auto racing, boxing, but we're big into cricket in India. We're big into soccer in the UK and on into Europe. We're about to launch in Spain. Argentina goes live. And in a lot of these outlying areas, the Sporting News will be the facing forward part of NBA.com. So an international presence doing content for the NBA. So that's a good partnership that we're excited about, and will be good for the Sporting News, and I think good for the NBA as well.
The old logo coming back?
In a fashion.
Okay.
It will look familiar, but it's a little modernized. Like any time when you're redoing a website, there have been bugs in the system. So we had aimed for last week to get this thing relaunched in the US. It's looking more like early January, but it will be light years ahead of what you see now on sportingnews.com. I'll give you a little secret. If you go to sportingnews.com/AU, you'll get the Australian version of what the website is. And that gives you kind of a peek at what the US website will look like.
I'll go there today. I can't wait.
Yeah.
I've been so anxious when I first started reaching out to you about us doing this, and you were talking about some of the rebranding, because I'm such a huge fan, and I'm a little bit of a nostalgia guy myself, so anyway, I can't wait. I can't wait to get onto the website.
Check it out, and you can find out about Aussie footy too. So you'll get all plugged in on that.
Hey, before we talk a little mid-major basketball, when you said, "Oh, yeah, I want to talk mid-major basketball with you," before we do that, so I'm going back through the history and thinking about things. Full Color in '91. You go online in '96. Paul Allen buys in 2000, and then One-on-One Sports comes along, and then the whole radio network. A lot of things shifting, and you mentioned them being downsized after you guys moved to the East Coast. It's just crazy in the media world these days how titanic the shifts are about everything constantly. The newspaper business is dying. Just talk about the state of maybe sports reporting over this last couple of decades, really.
Oh, again, the shifts have been just amazing to watch, to be swept up in, to be, buried under, to be quite honest, so, but you look at other, we talked about Sports Illustrated and ESPN, and everybody is fighting this same fight in the sense that magazines aren't a thing anymore for most people. And even linear TV isn't a thing for most people. ESPN is now fighting that kind of existential idea of, can we do it streaming? But that means having to cut off our pay TV arm. I follow some smaller college basketball programs that I can read the game stories online and tell that they were written by a computer. That's just the way it's done. It's a box score that AI takes the information and fashions a game story. So what we try and pitch to our younger people now, and we have, interns every semester. We have people who are fresh out of school and starting full time with us, that we still argue that this is our most important tool. your brain can offer context, can analyze, use critical thinking to talk about not just the who, what, when, where, but the how and the why. And that's the
Mhm.
challenge that every reporter is facing now. And that's a challenge that every company is facing now, because uh, the sporting news isn't just competing against, say, Sports Illustrated or ESPN. We're competing against Netflix. We're competing
Mhm.
against Disney Plus. We're competing against, growing kids in the household. We're competing against screen time with your phone. So we are this kind of weird news and entertainment outlet. We're still trying to be very, straightforward about what we're doing, but we also understand that we have to be entertaining in the way we do it. So that's part of the discussion we have every day as we're talking about the stories that we're going to attack on that particular day.
One of the horrible casualties of the way media things have changed is the annual magazine that would come out before a season and tell me all about every NFL player, every baseball player, or basketball, college basketball. Sporting News merged in with like Street and Smiths there for a couple of years,
Right.
but I don't think that magazine came out this year with basketball. And so those to me were like gold mines, and yet they don't really exist.
Well, the early harbinger of this, Harry, was when John Rawlings became the man who killed the box scores. And
Mm,
the Sporting News always ran
carried them,
major league
right?
box scores a whole week's worth, and that was, it could be 6 pages of content in a particular magazine. Well, there came a time where that wasn't necessary because you could get it immediately, either on the
Mhm.
internet or by other means. So daily newspapers were carrying those things. It didn't make sense for us to throw away that amount of space in our magazine. So John made that very, it was not a quick decision. We did, oh man, we did focus groups. We talked with advertisers. We did the whole schmear. And to a person, the expert said, you will lose 10% of your subscription base if you do that. And we
Wow.
sat and we thought, how is that possible? Where do these people live that they still need a week old box score? We went ahead and did it. And you know what? We lost 10% of our subscriber base. Now we eventually built it back, but we sat going, this is just stunning, So you live through these times, you learn through these times. I've got another quick story for you. One of the early things we tried to do was weekly major league team newsletters. So if you were a Yankees fan, you
Yep.
could subscribe to this newsletter and you get it mailed to you. And it'll be kind of an amalgamation of all the coverage we had on the Yankees in that particular week. The problem was it took the same amount of work to put together the Mariners newsletter as it did to do the Yankees newsletter. So you had,
Mhm.
close to 1,000 of the Yankees newsletters sold, and you had probably a dozen of the Mariners newsletters sold, right? So Mark Newman, who worked for us at that point, was overseeing this project. He eventually went to work at MLB.com and did great work for them. Has a new book out himself. But Mark would put this thing together after we had closed the magazine on Sundays, and he had the only Mac in the office at that point. And anytime there was a coding error that one of the editors had done on one of these newsletter files, the Mac would make this kind of boing noise, right? Well, anytime you heard that, oh God, I hope that wasn't what I had done that was
What I
making
wrote, right?
yeah, it's something that Mark was going to have to fix. Well, there was a guy who will remain nameless, but he brought his floppy disk over to Mark, plugged it in the Mac, and it just starts going boing, 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 boing. And of course, we're all just each one, it's just getting worse and worse. And Mark just kind of very calmly presses the eject button on the floppy disk. Kids, ask your dad what a floppy disk is.
Yeah, no
And
kidding.
we're all going, oh, what's he going to do? And he just turns around, he rears back and just throws it against the wall, and it shatters into a million pieces. The next day, Mark gets called into John's office, and John's like, Mark, you can't behave like that in the office. And Mark goes, John, I've got a deal for you. I won't behave like that in the office if I can just call those 12 Mariners newsletter subscribers and just read it to them instead of having to do the whole newsletter just for them. Well, again, we're trying stuff. Some stuff works, some stuff doesn't. I think that's what you witnessed in the group that bought us and moved us down to Charlotte. Some things worked for them, some things didn't. They sold a portion of it to a group based out of the UK, then sold the rest of it. So we're free from them. And then the group that bought us in the UK merged with Stats Inc. which has been a long time statistics provider.
Yeah.
And they decided they didn't need the sporting news per se. So, again, it's a lot of different circles going around that a lot of media companies are facing right now.
But you're right. Yeah, I mean, I've been reading articles about ESPN saying, well, we kind of don't need TV anymore. What are we going to do? We've got all this content and we do linear, and I can't imagine them ever leaving linear, broadcasts, honestly, but their moneymaker is online.
Well, yes and no. I mean, they're making about $10 for every subscriber to DirecTV or to YouTube TV or whatever. So the subscriber base through linear and pay TV especially is still it's a quandary for them, because they can't just shut it off because they need that money, and they're tied into all these long-term contracts with Major League Baseball and the NCAA, and they're facing some challenges, and there's smart people working there. Don't get me wrong; they're going to get it figured out, but it probably isn't going to be without some heartburn.
Let me take you back a little bit, though. You personally, favorite sport, favorite event, like in your history as a writer, reporter, etc.
I'm a baseball guy. Was raised in a baseball family. My dad was a bat boy for the Little Rock Travelers in the old Southern Association. So he brought me up, and my older brothers. We played baseball. I also played football as an undersized offensive lineman. I talk to kids now, they say, "Oh yeah, what position did you play?" I say I played offensive line. They look at me, 5'9". I played at like 170 probably. So it's just different game. But have always loved college football. I was born in Texas, so was kind of in the heart of the Southwest Conference at that point. My folks went to Arkansas. My brother went to Texas Tech and Rice. I have extended family that went to SMU and TCU and Baylor. Well, we didn't have anybody at Baylor. We always joke we're a Baptist shy of having the whole Southwest Conference covered. So my roots were there with college football before pro football. I mean, the Cowboys were relatively young when I was young, so probably followed college football more closely then. I'm a Bronco fan because we moved to Colorado when I was in junior high, so kind of started following them. But
your Twitter feed talks about liking the Colorado State Rams. What's that?
How about that? I'm an alum of Colorado State University, ranked number 23 in your latest top 25
they're high.
poll.
Yes, they are.
We're going to talk a little mid-majors here in a minute.
Okay.
Because they're a fun team to talk about and have some connections to that people probably will recognize from the Missouri Valley Conference.
Yep.
So, but there's nothing like a World Series, and that's what was great about being in St. Louis. The first time my wife and I went to Cooperstown, she finally got a grasp of what the Cardinals are. Because there's a lot of Yankees and a lot of Cardinals at the Hall of Fame, and having been fortunate enough to be there for some of the World Series champions, that's always exciting. All-star games are fun just because it's kind of like a get together of friends. So I get to see Ken Rosenthal again, and some of the Tim Kirchin and some of the other guys that come to know across the years. So I put baseball first, college football second, NFL third, but college basketball is gaining now with those Colorado State Rams. I'm telling you.
Colorado State, coached by Nico Medved.
Yes, sir. Nico's an interesting guy. He was on Tim Miles' staff at Colorado State, and when Tim left for Nebraska, I think Nico went with him for a while, but then started getting some head coaching jobs. He was at Furman for a while, came back to Drake for a season, and really got them going really in 1 year. On his staff at Colorado State is Ali Faroukmanesh,
Down goes Kansas.
UNI guy.
Down goes Kansas.
Yeah, exactly. So there's that connection, and they have done a great job with this team. They've done such a good job with this team that you start to worry somebody's going to steal Nico, like Nebraska stole Tim, even though that didn't work out for Tim Miles. He's at San Jose State now, and back in the conference, which delights me because he's a good dude and did a good job at CSU. But this Colorado State team is fun. They were the second team out of last year's tournament. First four out. They were the second of those first four out. End up in the NIT. They lose in the semifinals of the NIT, but they bring everybody back. Nobody in the transfer portal. It's pretty amazing. And they act like it was unfinished business last year. They thought they did enough to get in the tournament. So they've kind of started off with their hair on fire, and it's a fun group to watch because it's a deep rotation led by a couple of people that get mentioned most frequently. David Roddy, who's a really interesting guy. He was a high school quarterback in the Minneapolis area, and decided to go with basketball, and Nico got in on him early, and Roddy has become a double machine. He's like a Charles Barkley type player. He's about they list him at 6'5". I'm guessing he's probably not that tall, but he's got great hands, great feet. He can shoot the three, and just is, like I said, a double machine. And the other big player for him is Isaiah Stevens, guy out of the Dallas area, who had some offers from some power conferences, but decided for whatever reason that Colorado State looked good to him. And he's kind of a Chris Paul type player, great step back jumper. He's averaging about 5 assists for every turnover. So that, I mean, it's phenomenal what he does with the ball, and he distributes it to this really deep rotation. They're going to have to tighten their rotation when they get in conference play. I mean, they're going like, 10, 11 guys deep right now. And they've had some good wins. They beat Creighton, and that's going to be looking better. Creighton, I think, is like 8-2 now. They strummed St. Mary's, which is, St. Mary's will do well in the West Coast Conference. They just beat Mississippi State over the weekend. Big comeback. They were down 11 and outscored them 17-2 down the stretch to win. So
you're a real fan of that team.
I'm a fan of this team because of how they play the game. I mean, it's a fun group. Here's a game to circle on the calendar. It's next week on December 21st. They play Alabama. Now, Bama's like number 6 right now. They play them. It's a neutral court game. It's in Birmingham. How neutral would that be?
Super neutral.
It's the CM Newton Classic. Are you ready for that, brother? The CM Newton Classic. So that'll be a real test for them. I'm not sure they can do that, in Birmingham. But they're a good team, and they're a fun team. They're guys that have come back and didn't look to go elsewhere, didn't want to test the draft waters like a couple of them probably will be able to. So they bear watching, I think.
I liked Nico the one year he was at Drake, real personable guy. And then when he went right back to Colorado State, you're mad at him, but it's where he had been. I mean, he had some roots, and so you understand that. When you senior consultant to the Sporting News, what you talked about, mentoring some of the people, walking through some things. Tell us about your job with the Sporting News right now.
Well, I'm really excited right now because they've asked me to put together a quote unquote syllabus for Sporting News U. Wow. And it will be for the younger people, especially interns, but also people who are just coming out of school, who've learned a lot in journalism schools. I mean, the journalism schools today are so much better than they were back in our day, but it's still, to a great extent, it's a trade more than a profession. You got to, just through sheer repetition of learning how to talk to people and learning how to ask hard questions, and learning when to ask hard questions. You don't get in an interview and ask the hard question first, or all of a sudden the interview's over, right?
Right.
And you know that. So it's stuff like that. It's also calling on our deep reservoir of past talent. So I can have Mike DeCourcy or Ken Rosenthal come on a group Zoom call, and we just do kind of a roundtable about things we've learned across time about different skill sets and how you can build up your toolkit for being a better journalist. And I think that's a value we can bring as a longtime brand. Look, we're the only group that can say, okay, what did we write about Babe Ruth when he hit 60 home runs? I try and be really respectful of our competition, our quote unquote competition. But when Sports Illustrated celebrated their, I don't know, it was like their 60th or 70th anniversary a while back, I said, "Oh, isn't that cute? That we celebrated our 70th, like 5 years before you were born."
You're right.
So it's just kind of this idea. But I'll be honest with you too, Harry. There is some baggage that comes with that history too. The lifetime award that the Baseball Writers Association of America gave out was called the J.G. Taylor Spank Award. And through hard work by Ryan Fagan, our current Major League Baseball writer, we pretty well nailed down that J.G. Taylor Spink was not exactly the most racially sensitive person. And it's a hard legacy to have, but we faced up to it. We encouraged the baseball writers to take his name off the award.
Wow.
Just because, he fought integration of the major leagues, and we can't stand by and say, well, that was the Sporting News then. That's not us now. It was the Sporting News then, and we have to acknowledge that, and we're different now. So I think that was a big step for us. And, I think being honest with young people that even now, Harry, I'm 64 years old, and I look back at some of those stories and it just kind of makes me twitchy, talking about, the colored players.
Sure.
And, the Larry Doby, the anniversary of Larry Doby playing came up a while back. And I wanted to have something from the Sporting News that time. And there literally wasn't anything useful, because it was, Bill Veeck saying, teams are going to be going after these colored boys. And it's like, just, you're happy we have made progress that we've made. There's a lot more progress to be made, but you have to acknowledge that history was there.
When I was getting ready to do this conversation with you, I found an old article, or maybe it wasn't old, maybe it's recent. You were interviewing Mike DeCourcy about the Pittsburgh Pirates and their 71 team that had all players of color on the team. And then somebody said, did you know you had 9 black guys out there, or whatever they asked? And he said, okay, wow, I thought we had 9 pirates out there, or something like that.
Yeah, that's one of those kinds of stories that, again, we take anniversaries and kind of pull people into the present day. And Mike was a great interview. Not only is Mike a great interviewer, he's a great interview as well, and had great memories from that year. And what was really kind of a watershed moment with Clemente and Stargell and Pagan and Manny Sanguillen, and it was just a terrific team, terrific story to tell. And frankly, it's part of the discussion that we have with everybody on the staff now, of my nostalgia is different from your nostalgia. If you're my son's age, you look back on the 90s really fondly. If you're maybe a little bit old, it steps and steps and steps back and back and back. And we still run into a few people who say, oh, my granddad used to take the Sporting News, or my dad used to take the Sporting News. And that kind of immediately connects you and also tells you that feeling is universal. So we need to speak to nostalgia of people who remember 1971. We need to teach people who weren't alive in 71 what 71 meant.
Absolutely.
But also recognize that people alive in 2021, their nostalgia may be the early 2000s. So we look for stories there too. So it's always that kind of Easter egg hunt of what's gonna resonate with people. And that starts with the staff going and looking for that stuff.
I read somewhere that Lindenwood University here in St. Charles bought the archives of something related to the Sporting News. What does Lindenwood own of yours?
The company that bought the Sporting News and moved it down to Charlotte was American City Business Journals. And as part of that purchase, they got everything from the archives. They got all the photos. They got all the rookie questionnaires. Sporting News, each spring you would have rookies fill out questionnaires. And they were you talk about being able to go down a rabbit hole.
Yeah,
it would be Mickey Mantle is a rookie, and the questions would be, height, weight, hometown, just the basic stuff. And it'd be stuff like, do you have any nicknames? How did you get your nickname? What's the best thing you've done in baseball so far? And you could go down and look at any player you can think of really over a stretch of decades. And that's part of what ended up with ACBJ, and they have since donated it to Lindenwood. There is some stuff that was lost. If anyone used to enter the office on Lindbergh, there was really a fabulous memorabilia collection. That was, pins from World Series from back in the 30s. J.G. Taylor Spink was the official scorer in the World Series the year Bill Wambsgans turned the unassisted triple play the only one in World Series history.
Hmm.
And his scorebook page was mounted and on the wall there. So, I mean, it was fabulous stuff like that. Well, a lot of that stuff has now come home to Lindenwood, and it has to be kind of figured out, what do we got here? There were other things that were even more valuable. J.G. Taylor Spink's personal letters were not part of that collection. They were held separately and have now been turned over to Lindenwood. And his letters were letters from Ty Cobb. You know, hey, I think you ought to get on the ground floor of this company. It's called Coca-Cola. You know, I've invested in it, and I think you should too. And interestingly, for whatever reason, Ty Cobb always wrote in green ink. So there's all these letters in green ink. Well, you know, the archivist at Lindenwood knows something like that is valuable.
Sure.
What they're sorting through now is, okay, is this Phil Rizzuto rookie questionnaire valuable? Well, if you have a little bit of baseball history and you go, yeah, that's valuable, you know. So again, that's what archivists do. They sort through it, and the stuff they don't know, they consult with people who would know. So there was a ton of this material, and they are going to shepherd it through, I hope. Some of it is up online on their website, I think, at lindenwood.edu. You can probably go there and search sporting news and find some of it.
Wow, amazing. You every once in a while on Twitter, you post up like an old cover of the magazine.
Yeah.
Something the other day you had the one with T.O. eating the popcorn, and you know,
great picture by Albert Dixon.
Is that
Albert
amazing?
Dixon was the photographer. That was a great picture.
Yes. He was a great photographer. His stuff used to show up all the time in a big, vibrant way because he was so good.
Yeah, and a little inside baseball story for you is Albert is famous on the Sporting News staff for taking pictures of Tom Brady coming off the field after the Patriots had won their first Super Bowl, right? And Albert is walking backward, taking pictures, not knowing that he's about to fall over, trip over some camera luggage that was sitting right there. And Tom Brady like leaned forward to catch him. So Albert has this great series of pictures of just regular Tom Brady running off the field, but then all of a sudden Tom Brady lunging toward the camera because he was Albert over backwards with the camera. We love to tell that story on Albert every time we can.
That's amazing.
Good dude.
The covers were so great. You know, people, Sporting News has been famous for their Sporting News covers, and of course the curse that went alongside being on the Sports Illustrated cover. But your guys' covers were so great. It was so vibrant. Like you talked about the newsletter, but every week in the magazine, I could turn there, and every team there was going to be an analysis: what's hot, what's not. You know, those kinds of things about individual teams, individual sports. It was so amazing what you guys were able to crank out.
We had correspondence in every major sport, Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, and NHL. Correspondent for every team.
Yeah.
Now, that's a massive undertaking. These are mostly guys that worked at local newspapers that would do these files for us. But just getting those things into shape on a weekly basis was a big task for a staff our size, and was always fun, but it was a challenge. But we knew it was going to give people something that they could really use if they, if you're a Broncos fan living in Rock Hill, South Carolina, it's great now because I can, subscribe to the Denver Post or whatever and get that. But back then, you couldn't do that.
No, I mean, as an end line consumer, it was like, here I go. I'm gonna, the bad thing about the Sporting News is I was done reading it in about an hour and a half because I was just, consuming it. The Lindenwood thing also. When I think about those covers, like I have on my screen, on my laptop screen, some of the covers that have been on maybe Sports Illustrated of some of the Missouri Valley teams when they've done something famous. Does Sporting News do something where like fans could go back, search, buy, purchase, screenshot, do whatever they might do?
Not yet.
Okay.
That's all part of the big plan.
I love it.
Again, it's interesting. I did a piece for Cardinals Magazine about the vanishing paper ticket, right? And as a starting point was literally my shoebox full of ticket stubs for games that my son and I went to, just kind of mementos that, hey, this was a game we were at. I also have a collection of, as I'm sure you probably do too, press passes that you hang on to for events you've been at. And part of this story was talking with the company in Arkansas that for years and years and years back into the early 20th century had printed the Cardinals tickets for them. And I finally asked the guy who was, at the company, and I said, what do you do about that? And he said, well, we're real close to, and I think they already are there now, of being able, if people are at a game, you barcode scan to get in the game or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
If something momentous happens at that game, anything from a 4 home run night by your favorite player to, your proposal showed up on the Jumbotron, you can now scan that barcode to them and they will literally print out a
That's
one-off
cool.
ticket that serves as your memento. So again, I think a lot of companies are moving in that direction. We have such a depth of historic stuff. I kind of get what NFTs are. I'm not sure I buy that I would be investing very strongly in them, but
Sure.
that's something that I think we have to consider as a company. And, it's this idea of things that aren't around anymore still carry value, whether it's a ticket stub or a cover to a Sports Illustrated or a Sporting News, feature or whatever. There's lots of ways that we can look at what used to look like a one-way street, but now it goes both ways, and fans can tell you, hey, I want that, and here's what I'm willing to pay for it. Because again, the bottom line is the bottom line, right? If we don't make enough money, we're not a company anymore. We've been lucky enough to make that work since 1886. We're still trying to figure it out. I always think about the time I was talking with Tony Gwynn, and he was talking about it takes imagination to hit a breaking ball. You see it out here, but you got to imagine it's going to be, at your knees or wherever by the time it hits home plate. Well, I think that's what media companies are doing now. We don't know what it's going to be a year from now, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, but we're trying to imagine it, envision the breaking ball, and try and square it up on the bat, which in our case would be stay in business. And I think it's just kind of exciting. And I tease the young kids at the office that, I try and pull out the Martin Luther King Jr. speech of, I may not get there with you, but I've seen the other side and it's exciting. So, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I'm Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I am not. But that resonates in my head as I grow increasingly gray, what little bit of hair I've got, and understand that there are exciting times ahead. I hope the Sporting News will be around for them.
In this digital world, it's so amazing, right? I mean, like I write for a national website that has just hundreds of writers. I mean, they just have sucked all kinds of people like me in, and now I think I'm important, and so
let's be clear on that, Harry. You are important.
Oh yeah, there you
Maybe
go.
not because of that, but you are important.
but you mentioned it earlier. The competition isn't ESPN. It's a million other things. It's oil of Olay commercials. I mean, it's just everything that you could conceive of. You're trying to cut that niche, cut that path, so somebody will know you're there.
Yeah, and I have really mixed feelings about how gambling is taking over our world. And I'm going to turn into the old man shouting at the clouds here just for a second. Won't take long. I get that gambling and wagering has always been a part of the sports landscape. It always has. I worked in Fort Worth, Texas in the late 80s, and there were probably a handful of guys on the sports desk who each had a different bookie, right? I mean, it's been there forever. The 1919 Black Sox.
Yeah, right.
So I'm a little squeamish about where we are now. I understand why we're there now, but I also understand that integrity of the game has to be paramount. I'm not sitting here saying it's not going to be because leagues are partnering up and teams are partnering up with gambling companies, and but let's not lose sight of what the competition is. Let's not lose sight of what competing is. And that's what makes, as you well know, covering sports the greatest thing in the world. Is you think you have seen it all, until one day you go to a game and lo and behold, wow, I have never seen that before.
Right.
And it happens in every sport at every level. And it's why I've been blessed to have this career. It's also why we used to laugh at the news side at a daily newspaper because, oh, it's election day. It's election day. We aren't going to know how things turn out until 10 o'clock at night. Let's bring in pizza and hot dogs for all the editors and writers. And it's like, we all look at each other and go, hey, welcome to the night on the sports desk.
Yeah,
You know,
it's
we're not
Tuesday.
till the Pacific Coast games are over in Major League Baseball. You know, like,
Yeah.
again, it's a, and then to kind of be looked down upon as the toy department. It's like, how many of these newspapers hit a front step and the first thing that gets pulled out of it is the sports section?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Exactly right. I shouldn't keep you a whole lot longer. I'm super excited about what you're doing, and you're still being engaged in the sporting news because I said it before, being nostalgic. I think there's something important about the sporting news and some of the guys like yourself that are carrying the tradition, that are nurturing that tradition along. It really matters to me, and I know it does to you.
Well, I appreciate that, Harry. Again, I didn't fall in love immediately with the sporting news. That's what happens when you're in a relationship for as many years as I was. That it just, you know, I started finishing my employer's sentences, you know, and I am so proud and appreciative of the sporting news, and I'm delighted to be back with them now in a full-time basis, and yeah, carrying that history forward and playing a little bit teacher, a little bit coworker, a little bit dream machine, you know, and having some fun.
I love it, man. I love it. I appreciate you taking time with us today. And I know a lot of our folks in the Midwest, and for sure will remember deeply, you know, what has gone on in the sporting news and your engagement with it. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. And I'm going to get on that website. You said the sporting news /AU, and I can get a little cheat sheet look at what it might look like.
It's not a backslash; it's just a slash. But
Okay.
you'll get in the neighborhood if you start messing around with your slashes.
So sometime in January, we think the big change is coming.
Fingers crossed.
There you go.
It's all with the development guys.
I hear you.
I think Ukraine or something like that, but you know, it's a flat world we live in now.
I appreciate it so much. That's Bob Hille of the Sporting News, and pretty soon the sportingnews.com is going to have a fresh look, and you should go there as well. Thanks for paying attention to the podcast today. I'm Harry Schroeder, reminding you, since you've been there, make it a better place. We'll see you again real soon.